A lion has risen in Rome, but this is no ordinary lion and no ordinary pope. In May of 2025, the world watched a quiet man step out onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, and most of us knew almost nothing about him. But the name he chose, Leo XIV, it wasn't random. It carried echoes of two giants of Catholic history, Leo the Great, who faced down Attila the Hun without an army, and Leo XIII, who fought the dignity of workers in an age of industrial upheaval. And now, here we are again, at the edge of upheaval, artificial intelligence reshaping work, wars flaring across continents, a world fractured between wealth and poverty, trust and fear. And in the middle of it all, a pope from America, with a life story as improbable as prophecy itself. Today, I want to show you why I believe Pope Leo XIV's election wasn't just a twist of history, but a sign, and why, if I'm right, he may be the bridge between a world on fire and a world reborn. Now, my friends, before we begin, I'd be truly thankful if you could take just a moment to like this video. And in the comments below, tell me, how old are you, and where in the world are you watching from? I always enjoy seeing the faces and places that gather around these conversations. All right, let's begin our journey together. You know, my friend, I've been watching popes come and go since I was a young theology student back in the 70s, and I've seen the church go through seasons of glory and seasons of deep confusion. I've seen St. John Paul II stand firm against communism. I've seen Benedict XVI wrestle with the storms of secularism. And I've seen Francis try to bring the church into dialogue with a restless, wounded world. But when I stood before my television screen on that evening of May 3rd, 2025, and the voice from the balcony in St. Peter's Square announced, Habemus Papam, Leo Quartus Decimus, something inside me shifted. I can't explain it as a political analyst would. I felt it in my bones, the way an old fisherman can smell the storm before the clouds appear. The cameras panned to him, Robert Francis Prevost, a man from Chicago, the first American pope in history, standing in white on that ancient balcony, looking out over a sea of pilgrims holding candles against the Roman night. And right then, before he even spoke, my mind went to two of the Leos who carried that name before him. Not just a coincidence. No, my friend, popes choose their names with care, prayer, and intent, like a soldier choosing his banner before battle. The first was Leo the Great, Pope Leo I, who in 452 AD stood at the gates of Rome and met Attila the Hun face to face. He didn't have an army behind him, just faith, courage, and the conviction that God could turn back even the most fearsome of enemies. And history tells us that Attila turned his armies away. Some say it was diplomacy, others say it was fear of plague, but the faithful have always believed it was divine intervention through a lion-hearted shepherd. The second was Leo XIII, who in 1891 wrote Rerum Novarum, a letter to the whole church that became the foundation of Catholic social teaching in the modern era. He spoke up for workers, the poor, and the dignity of labor in the industrial age, when machines were replacing hands and greed was replacing community. That teaching still echoes today, and I can't help but notice how deeply it connects to the age we are in now, an age when algorithms and artificial intelligence threaten to displace millions, when the new machines are not steam engines, but invisible lines of code. So, when Robert Prevost stepped onto that balcony and said the words, "I have chosen the name Leo," I didn't hear a random choice. I heard a mission statement. I heard him saying, "I will be a lion for peace, a lion for justice, a lion for the dignity of the human person in a dangerous age." And my friend, when you see the church in the shape it's in, divided, weary, too often swayed by politics, and when you see the world with its wars and its AI revolutions, you begin to understand why such a name matters. Now I know some will roll their eyes and say, "You're reading too much into a name." But Scripture teaches us that names carry weight. Isaiah 62:2 says, "You shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give." When God called Abram to be Abraham, it was because he was expanding his mission. When he called Simon to be Peter, it was because he was building a rock. So why should we think that the Bishop of Rome, standing in the line of Peter, would not also choose his name as a prophetic sign of his calling? And here's the thing, the name is not just about the past, it's about the future. Rome itself is not what it once was. The city has seen scandal, division, and a loss of moral voice in the world. The church has weathered abuse crises, political entanglements, and doctrinal infighting. Some call it the ashes of Rome, not because the stones have crumbled, but because the moral fire has burned low. And yet, out of those ashes, a lion has risen, not a roaring lion seeking to devour, but a steady lion, the kind Isaiah spoke of, who lies down with the Lamb, whose roar is one of justice and truth. In August 2025, as I sit here recording as for you, I'm struck by how quickly the world is testing him. His first 100 days have been anything but ceremonial. Wars rage. Technology races ahead faster than law or ethics. People are losing trust in every institution. And yet here is this man, this Pope Leo XIV, walking calmly into the fire, speaking of peace where others speak of vengeance, speaking of human dignity where others speak only of efficiency and profit. I've read his early speeches. I've listened to him carefully. And my friend, I'll tell you this. I believe he chose Leo because he sees himself standing between the flock and the wolves. He knows history. He knows prophecy. And whether he admits it openly or not, I think he knows that this moment is bigger than himself. You might think I'm exaggerating, but give me time. As we move deeper into this conversation, I'll show you why I believe Leo XIV was not only the right choice for Pope. He may be the one man positioned by Providence to steady the church and speak truth into a world that's about to be shaken to its core. For now, remember this. Popes do not choose their names by accident. And when a man takes the name Leo in a time of lions and lambs, wars and algorithms, it is because he intends to stand his ground. May God give him the courage to keep standing, and may God give us the ears to listen. You remember, my friend, how in the last chapter I told you that popes don't choose their names by accident. And I stand by that, because names are roots. They connect you to something larger than yourself, to a history you cannot escape. But a name is only part of the story. The man who wears it carries his own blood, his own heritage, his own scars. And if you really want to understand why Pope Leo XIV stands where he stands today, you need to know something about the road that brought him here and the people who walked it before him. Robert Francis Prevost was born in Chicago in 1955, the child of a family whose story blends the grit of working-class America with the deep faith of Catholic tradition. His parents weren't aristocrats. They didn't come from the polished marble halls of European Catholic nobility. They were ordinary, which, if you've read your Bible, is exactly the kind of soil God likes to work with. Remember when Jesus looked at Simon Peter and said, "You are the rock"? He wasn't pointing to a man who had studied in palaces. He was pointing to a fisherman with calloused hands. That's how God works. He calls ordinary men into extraordinary missions. Now, Robert's grandparents, and this is important, were immigrants. His paternal family traced back to southern Italy, the same lands that for centuries were crossroads of faith, empire, and conflict. On his mother's side, there's French-Canadian heritage, bringing in another stream of Catholic tradition. You may not think much of that at first, but those roots matter. They make him not just a son of America, but a son of two old Catholic worlds that once faced the rise and fall of empires. That kind of heritage carries a memory of survival, of faith tested in fire. It's fitting, then, that Robert would one day become a missionary priest. He could have stayed in the United States, teaching theology in a safe seminary classroom, but instead, he went out. And here's where his life takes on a prophetic thread. In 1985, he went to Peru, a country torn by violence, poverty, and deep cultural wounds. He learned Spanish. He learned the customs. He walked with people whose lives had been crushed by economic despair and terror from the Shining Path insurgency. He didn't visit as a tourist priest. He lived among them. This is not a small detail, my friend. The papacy is often criticized for being distant from suffering, but Leo XIV's formation happened in the dust of Andean villages, not just in marble corridors. And think about this. The church today is desperate for bridges between north and south, rich and poor, first world and developing world. Robert Prevost is that bridge. He speaks English like the Chicagoan he is, Spanish like a native, and he understands both worlds because he's lived both worlds. You can't teach that in a university. You have to live it. This is why I call his bloodline and his life's work a bridge. On one side, you have his American birth and education, his grounding in Western Catholicism, his understanding of how the church operates in a developed nation. On the other side, you have his missionary years in Latin America, his leadership in Peru as Bishop of Chiclayo, and his closeness to the struggles of ordinary people. Both sides flow into him. And when the College of Cardinals was looking for a man in 2025 who could speak to the whole church, not just one part of it, they found that bridge. Some will say, heritage doesn't make a pope holy. And I agree, it doesn't. But heritage can prepare a man to see the church as more than a bureaucracy. It can prepare him to see it as a family scattered across nations and languages. And I think God often arranges these things quietly, without us noticing, until the moment comes when all the threads tie together. Now, why is this important for August 2025? Because right now, today, Pope Leo is being pulled in two directions. Europe wants him to preserve tradition. Latin America wants him to fight for social justice. The United States expects him to speak to its moral crises. And somehow, in these first 100 days, he's speaking to all of them. Not perfectly, no man could, but enough that people from vastly different places feel they can claim him. That's not politics, my friend. That's bridge building. That's blood speaking through generations. That's what makes Leo Font not just a name from the past, but a man for the present. I'll tell you something. I've studied paper elections for decades, and I've never seen a man who so naturally unites opposites. It's why I believe that when history looks back on May 3rd, 2025, they'll see more than just the day an American became Pope. They'll see the day a bridge was crowned, a bridge that God had been building in silence for 70 years. And if God went to such lengths to prepare this man, then we should at least have the humility to listen to him, because the messages he's carrying might not be for the church in the abstract. They might be for you. You know, my friends, when we look at history, there's something remarkable about how God chooses to prepare his servants. And if you've followed me from the first 2 chapters, you'll see that Pope Leo XIV's preparation didn't start the day he walked out onto that balcony in May of this year. It didn't even start when he became a bishop or a cardinal. It began decades ago, quietly, almost invisibly, in the way God often works. And at the center of that preparation was the Augustinian spirit, a way of life rooted in one of the great doctors of the Church, St. Augustine of Hippo. Now, I want to pause here, because I know not everyone listening has spent years in seminary libraries like I have. St. Augustine taught, in words that have echoed for more than 1,600 years, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." That's not just poetic theology. That is the lived reality of every human being, and it is the foundation of the Augustinian worldview. Augustine believed that beneath every political crisis, beneath every technological revolution, beneath every war and every cultural shift, there lies a deeper unrest, the human heart searching for God. Now here's where this connects to Leo XIV. He was formed as an Augustinian, and that charism, that spiritual DNA, is like the spine of his leadership today. When he looks at the world of 2025, with artificial intelligence transforming work and identity, with millions displaced by conflict and climate, with whole nations split down the middle by ideology, he doesn't just see statistics or headlines. He sees restless hearts, and he believes that the solution is not simply better policy or faster innovation. It's communion. Communion with God. Communion with one another. Augustine taught that the church is not just a structure. It is a community of love, built by people who walk together toward God. That's the vision Leo carries, and it shapes every decision he makes. You can already see it in his earliest acts as Pope. Within weeks of his election, he convened a working group, and I'm talking about one of the most unusual Vatican gatherings in modern memory. You had ethicists from MIT sitting next to theologians from Bangalore, engineers from Nairobi exchanging notes with young parish leaders from Lima. Why? Because Leo wanted to craft a document on AI ethics, an encyclical that wouldn't just recycle church language, but actually grappled with the moral questions of our digital age. He's calling it Salvificum Algorithmus, the saving algorithm. And even the title tells you something. He believes that these systems we are building must serve humanity's salvation, not undermine it. That's Augustine's restless heart, applied to the 21st century. And this isn't just intellectual exercise. This is a man who, during his time in Peru, sat on dirt floors in community halls, listening for hours before offering counsel. He learned that leadership isn't about imposing a vision from above. It's about creating space where people feel heard and valued so they can discern the truth together. That's synodality. That's the Augustinian way. And when he stepped into the papacy, he didn't drop that. He elevated it. His first major Vatican address was not a proclamation. It was an invitation. He called the whole church into a season of listening. And I can tell you, that is rare. Most popes begin with a list of things they want to change. Leo began with a posture of humility. Now, I know some people roll their eyes when they hear dialogue or listening sessions. They think it sounds soft, or worse, indecisive. But let me remind you, when Augustine wrote his rule, he made it clear that unity in community doesn't come by silencing differences. It comes by confronting them honestly in the light of charity. And that's what Leo is doing. He knows that in this restless age, when nations are suspicious of each other, when political discourse feels like a never-ending shouting match, the church can either join the noise or become a place where people can finally hear one another again. And in his mind, that's not just good pastoral practice, that is prophetic. You see, prophecy is not always about predicting the future. Often, it is about revealing God's heart for the present. And Leo XIV's Augustinian roots position him perfectly for that task. He's not dazzled by power or paralyzed by complexity. He knows that the same God who guided Augustine through the collapse of the Roman Empire is still guiding his church through the upheavals of our day. And that conviction, that steady confidence in divine providence, is why I believe he was raised up for this moment. And friends, here's where it gets deeply personal. I've been teaching a prophecy for years. I've seen trends come and go, names rise and fall. But when I watch Leo faithfully, I see something rare. A man whose intellectual formation, pastoral instincts, and prophetic sensitivity are aligned. There's no contradiction between the professor, the pastor, and the prophet in him. They are one. And that's why this Augustinian spirit, this restless heart theology, matters so much right now. Because if we don't recognize the spiritual hunger beneath our global crises, all our fixes will be temporary at best. But if we do, if we allow a shepherd like Leo to guide us toward the true center of peace, then even in an age of algorithms and unrest, we may yet find the rest we were made for. You see, my friends, in the months that have passed since May, since that day when the bells of St. Peter's tolled and the name Leo XIV was proclaimed to the world, the real test has not been in his words from the balcony, nor in the soft, measured homilies of those first liturgies, but in the way he has responded to a world already trembling under the weight of its own divisions. And I have to tell you, I have watched this closely, because it is one thing to speak about peace in abstract terms. It is another to carry that peace into the fire, to walk deliberately into places where peace is most absent. And almost immediately, the fire came. Only weeks after his election, reports broke of a missile strike that tore through the grounds of a church compound in Gaza, shattering not only stone, but the fragile trust of an already weary people. While political leaders hesitated, issuing carefully balanced statements or avoiding the subject altogether, Leo XIV spoke plainly. He condemned the strike without hedging, called it a wound to the human family, and then quietly but firmly set about working behind the scenes. Vatican channels opened, UN contacts were engaged, humanitarian corridors were pressed for, and within days, medical access was restored to that part of the city. This was not a headline-grabbing stunt. In fact, much of it went unnoticed until later reports confirmed it. But it was a deliberate act, rooted in what I would call the Augustinian conviction that mercy without action is incomplete. Then there was Ukraine. You may have noticed how strangely silent the Vatican seemed for a time regarding the Russian advance and the unending counteroffensives. Some critics called it indecision, others thought it was weakness, but I believe it was what one British paper shrewdly called silence as strategy. Leo XIV, in those weeks, met with envoys from both Kiev and Moscow in private, avoiding grand public gestures so as not to harden the lines. He listened, he learned, he searched for openings. You will not read about all of these meetings in the mainstream press, but I am convinced that it is precisely this kind of listening leadership that can shift the tone of conflicts. Proverbs 17:28 reminds us, "Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue." In the halls of diplomacy, this restraint is not cowardice, it is wisdom. And then, in a completely different arena, he turned his attention to what many of us see as one of the defining issues of our age, the rise of artificial intelligence. He has been preparing something, a document whose working title is Salvificum Algorithmus, the saving algorithm. Now you might think, what business does a pope have speaking about algorithms? But friends, this is not about code, it is about justice. Leo XIV understands, as Leo XIV once understood about industrial labor, that the tools of progress can just as easily be tools of oppression if they are not shaped by a moral framework. I have read the early drafts circulating among scholars, calls for transparency in algorithmic decision-making, safeguards against the replacement of human judgment with machine calculation, demands that the dignity of work be upheld in a time when machines can do the work of thousands. And it is here, in this convergence of geopolitical peacemaking and technological moral vision, that the deeper truth becomes clear. Leo XIV is not experimenting with an agenda. He is executing one he has carried for years. The choice of his name, the formation of his conscience in Augustinian thought, the heritage of bridging cultures, all of this is now finding expression in deliberate action. It is as if the Lion Pope has stepped down from the symbolic realm of prophecy into the grit of history, where every decision is a battle for justice, and every moment is a chance to show that peace is not merely a dream, but a commandment. And my friends, if the first 90 days of his pontificate are any indication, then we are witnessing not the cautious steps of a newcomer, but the steady stride of a man who knows precisely where he is going. And so, my friends, here we are, standing at the end of this reflection, but perhaps at the beginning of something far greater than any of us yet understand. We have walked together through the name Leo, through the heritage of Robert Francis Prevost, through his Augustinian soul, and through his first months in a world already ablaze. But now we must ask, and this is the question that has pressed on me since the moment his name was first announced, is this man the answer to an old prophecy, or is he the invitation to one yet unfolding? You see, Isaiah 11 gives us that unforgettable vision. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The lion here is not the predator we fear, it is the reconciler, the one who dwells at peace with what was once opposed. For centuries, the Church Fathers saw this not only as a vision of the Messiah, but as a call to all shepherds of the Church to mirror that reconciling nature. And I cannot ignore that, in name, in spirit, and in action, Leo XIV has stepped into that image in a way I have never seen in my lifetime. Now, I am not alone in noticing this. There is that much debated document, the prophecy of the popes attributed to Saint Malachi. Scholars argue over its authenticity. Some call it a pious fraud from the Renaissance, others a coded work of genuine foresight. But in the list, after Francis, the figure is described with words that, in loose Latin rendering, can be taken as the roaring lion or the lion at the gates. I don't build my faith on private prophecies, but it is remarkable how this aligns with a man who has become, quite literally, the Lion Pope, and not a European one at that, but an American, the first in history. It is not hard to see why so many ordinary believers, and even non-believers, have begun speaking about destiny. You may have seen it yourself. Within just 48 hours of his election, the hashtag Lion Pope flooded every social media platform. 98 million views in 2 days. Young people making artwork of a roaring lion with a mitre. Farmers in Latin America calling him León del Pueblo, the people's lion. Pilgrims showing up at St. Peter's with hand-painted banners quoting Isaiah 11. This is not Vatican marketing. This is a groundswell, a kind of collective sensing that something about this man touches on more than politics or doctrine. It feels inevitable, almost as if the world had been waiting for this image, this figure, without knowing it. And yet, let me be clear, prophecy in the biblical sense is barely about predicting an unchangeable future. It is about revealing a possibility, showing what could be if people respond in faith. Think of Jonah and Nineveh. The destruction was foretold, but the people repented, and the disaster was delayed. In the same way, Leo XIV's emergence might not be a sealed fate, but a God-given window, a chance, a summons. I look at the threads we have followed, the deliberate choice of his name echoing Leo the Fool's confrontation with violence, and Leo XIII's defense of the worker, the heritage that bridges immigrant struggle and Caribbean resilience, the Augustinian conviction that restlessness must find its rest in God, the early acts of courage in Gaza, in Ukraine, and in shaping a moral vision for technology. And I see a pattern, not the pattern of a man chasing glory, but the pattern of one who is quietly stepping into the very role his name proclaimed. And if you will allow me to say it, I think he knows it. But here is where you come in. Because no matter how many symbols align, no matter how much history seems to point toward this moment, the work of reconciliation, justice, and peace will not happen without the body of Christ, without you, without me, without communities choosing mercy over hatred, truth over propaganda, humility over pride. Pope Leo can speak, he can act, but a lion's roar is wasted if no one moves when they hear it. So perhaps the real prophecy is not about one man at all. Perhaps the prophecy is about what God can do through a church, through a people, through a generation that refuses to yield to despair. Perhaps Leo XV is the first roar in a forest, long thought silent. And my friends, if that is true, then history is not just happening in Rome. It is happening in your home, in your parish, in the way you choose to live tomorrow morning. The age of peace Isaiah saw is not going to appear by magic. It will come when we stop tearing each other apart long enough to let God knit us back together. I cannot tell you if in 50 years historians will look back and say, yes, that was the prophecy fulfilled. But I can tell you this, if we answer this call, If we act now, if we make the Lion Pope's mission our mission, then whatever the prophecy meant will have found its fulfillment in us. So may we have the courage to step into it. And may we hear the words of Revelation 5:5. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. Friends, if this message touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you could share it with others. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your own experiences. Your voice matters here. God bless you, and may His peace and protection be over you, your home, and your family. Thank you for watching, and I truly hope the days ahead bring light and hope into all our lives. See you in the next one.